2026 is going to be a massive year in US politics. The midterms will test public opinion just under 2 years into Trump's second presidential term. More or less straight after that, the 2028 presidential election will be in full swing, with Democrats and Republicans alike jostling to be their party's nominee. There will be a debate in both parties slowly starting this coming year about where the party should place themselves ideologically going into the future. And at the same time, this administration shows little sign of slowing, so we can expect much more breakneck speed politics coming from the White House. An easy way to stay up to date is by watching the big actors. So in this video, I have put together a guide to the 12 US politicians you should watch in 2026 to be in the best position to understand what's happening. Some of these names are massive household names, some are more obscure, but all of them will, I believe, play a massive role next year. And so, without any further ado, let's get started with some honorable mentions. Before we get to the real list, here's 5 extra names I think are also worthy of a mention and some consideration. The first name on that list is James Talarico. Talarico is a member of the Texas State House of Representatives and is running in the Democratic primary for the 2026 Senate race against Jasmine Crockett. Mainstream soft progressive circles have been heralding this guy as if he were the second coming of Christ, which is apt considering his flavor of Democrat, which is a sort of very Christian, semi-progressive social democrat. In many ways, he feels like a throwback to the age of Jimmy Carter. And so the question becomes, if he's successful, is this a strategy that's adopted by other candidates elsewhere? The second honorable mention is Marjorie Taylor Greene. On the 5th of January next year, Greene will formally resign her seat in the House of Representatives, following a very tense period of conflict between her and her once idol Donald Trump. So in theory, she should not be all that interesting to watch if she's leaving politics. But there are indeed rumors that she very much is not leaving politics, but instead considering a run for president in 2028. I doubt she could win a primary, but I don't doubt that if she starts setting up for a candidacy next year, that she will be able to really garner a lot of attention and really set some parameters for some debates within the Republican Party that were otherwise not on the table. And the question would then be whether she would be able to try to turn part of the MAGA base into her more ideologically pure and rhetorically safe version of the movement. The next person to watch is Chuck Schumer. The Democratic minority leader in the Senate is mostly going to be interesting to watch because he finds himself on very thin ice and could very well be counting his days in post now. He has been in charge of the Democratic group since 2017, but this year's lost fight against the White House, first a kowtowing to a stopgap in March that angered some Democrats, and then the collapse of the Democratic group during the recent government shutdown, which angered even more colleagues. Considering this and the fact that Democrats will really struggle to win power in the Senate next year, I don't think Schumer will be interesting to watch from a policy or power perspective, but instead just mostly from an internal contest perspective. That is, of course, unless he decides to try to pick another fight with Trump in early 2026 when the remainder of the budget vote takes place. The next person on the honorable mentions list is Kristi Noem, who, of course, is the Secretary of Homeland Security. The real reason it'll be interesting to watch her is because she is so synonymous with the White House's immigration policy. And immigration policy is one of the most important policies for Donald Trump. The reason she's not higher on the list is because I actually think the immigration policy has been mostly set in the first year of the second Trump administration. But of course, a few questions will remain. Will ICE raids continue at their current level? Will pushback intensify, or will raids become more normalized? And we can expect more fights around the El Salvador scheme. And what about the recent US and immigration bans targeting certain countries? What will happen to those? The final person to get an honorable mention is also a cabinet member, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor responsible for foreign policy, as well as a potential 2028 presidential contender. The interesting things to keep an eye on with Rubio is how he positions himself for 2028. He suggested he won't run if JD Vance does, but things can always change. And Rubio would be a massive change back to a much more neoconservative type of GOP were he to run. He is of course also interesting to watch from a policy perspective, with so many foreign conflicts and escalating tensions currently going on. However, interestingly, while he clearly has a lot of responsibility and managerial involvement, he no longer seems like the main driver on a lot of foreign policy. We'll get to those bigger drivers on the actual list shortly. But Rubio is still important to watch, especially from an ideological perspective. And with that, let's get to our main list. 12 US politicians to watch in 2026. We'll begin at number 12 with Peter Navarro. The first person on the real list is the counselor to the president. He is the thought leader and chief architect behind Trump's tariffs, and because of exactly that reason, he's going to be interesting to follow. Much of the Liberation Day tariff announcements have been rolled back, agreements have been quietly negotiated and rolled out, but a lot of questions still remain. And Navarro is a key player advocating for more tariff, to the dismay of Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick. A few big questions still remain. Firstly, is the administration going to continue to move away from tariffs, or is this a tool that could be brought out again, either to dominate headlines or to punish foreign leaders? There are also questions about what will happen with currently in place tariffs. One of the big ones being the current ongoing trade war with Canada, where US-Canadian trade talks broke down earlier in the year. The other being with China, where there have been some sides of the trade war cooling a little bit in recent months. And while tariffs haven't shown as significantly inflationary impact as many expected, counter-tariffs seem to be affecting the US jobs market and agriculture sector. Will this come to a head, and will Navarro be able to make Trump hold the line? Well, time will tell. Now, let's turn to number 11 with Russell Vought. Russell Vought is the director of the Office of Management and Budget in the Donald Trump White House. In this role, Vought has taken on two main tasks. One, extending the powers of the president, and two, cutting federal spending. Vought has been in Trump's inner circle for a while and served in his last administration too. But it wasn't until the government shut down this year that he really became prominent. That's because he used the shutdown to cut spending through slashes to various departments and employees. This wasn't without controversy and led to some showdowns about presidential powers that have led to very, very little. The thing that'll be interesting to watch with regards to Vought next year is whether any more cuts to the federal government take place. They probably will. So then what will it be? He'll surely be involved with ongoing attempts to dismantle the Department of Education, for example. And then there are questions about whether he will be able to continue to strengthen presidential powers for the Trump administration in terms of the structuring of federal agencies. What fights will be taken up in 2026? Because there will be fights. And what does a weakened, dismantled federal government department look like in practice compared to a strengthened White House? Do cuts to bureaucracy lead to more effectiveness, or do they lead to less effectiveness? And what other crises will the Trump administration try to utilize to its own success? Let's now turn to number 10 with Dan Osborne and Graham Plattner. We're only a few entries in and I'm already cheating, but it's my list, so what are you gonna do? The reason I've bundled these two fellas together is because I think what is interesting about one is the same with the other. And that's because I think these two men represent a potential direction that the American left may consider taking. Dan Osborne is an independent candidate for the Senate election in Nebraska next year, while Graham Plattner is running to be the Democratic candidate for the Senate race in Maine. Both are working class, burly, manly men. Osborne was a factory worker turned labor union leader, and Plattner is an oyster farmer. Both are economically on the left, what you would call the progressive part of the US left, and both are very big labor union guys. And in the aftermath of the 2024 election and with the 2026 elections, these are interesting takes on where the US left should go. Now, of course, one is standing as a Democrat and one is standing as an independent. But I think the more interesting difference between these two men is on social policy. Osborne is more right-wing on immigration, LGBT issues, and abortion, while Plattner is also more socially liberal on all of these topics. But of course, that's not really the policy that matters when talking about these two. What I think matters is their vibes and their economics, and whether this becomes something that Democrats seek out. So firstly, it'll be interesting to see whether they're successful. Secondly, it'll be interesting to see whether their success translates into general ideological discussions. Next on the list at number 9 is Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. AOC is a Democratic member of the House of Representatives for a New York district. But of course, she's more well known as a thought leader of the progressive left in the Democratic Party and the heir to the Bernie Sanders coalition. AOC is interesting for a couple of reasons. One pre-midterms and one post-midterms. Pre-midterms, she's incredibly interesting to observe because she'll be endorsing candidates in Democratic primaries, and her endorsement means quite a lot, more than pretty much anyone else's. So two things will be interesting from that perspective. One, what kind of candidates will she endorse? What flavor of progressive Democrat is she after? What about a Plattner? Two, how successful will her endorsements be? Are Democrats going to be wanting to go down the progressive route like they often do in midterm years? Post-midterms, she'll be interesting to watch for another reason, to see what kind of role she'll be given. assuming the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives? Will she be given a chair position on a committee? She's not currently a ranking member on any committee, so that would require her replacing someone else, perhaps leading to drama. But on the other hand, if the Democratic leadership didn't give her a chair position, that would also be a very strange, alienating way to treat the progressive wing of the party. And of course, throughout the year, she is also just going to be interesting to watch as a potential 2028 presidential candidate. Next up is a fellow progressive Democrat at number 8 with Zoran Mamdani. The Democratic mayor-elect of New York City will be sworn in on the 1st of January next year. The reason that a mayor is this high on the list is not because the work he does will have super much significance for the rest of the US practically. Instead, it's because if he fails, if he doesn't manage to take some significant steps in the first year, well then that will be a massive tear in the Democratic Socialist banner in the US. But if he succeeds and manages to deliver some positive outcomes for New York City, a lot of Democrats will give him a very serious second look and start to wonder whether that's maybe the way the party should be heading. In other words, his mayorship will be watched very closely around the world, but especially in the US, and perhaps unfairly, a lot of very broad general conclusions will be drawn based on his successes and failures. I don't condone this, but I promise you it will happen. And for that very reason, you should watch what happens in New York City as well. And of course, it'll also just be interesting to see how Mamdani conducts himself in the primaries for the midterms. Will he endorse candidates himself across the country, or maybe just in New York? And will he endorse the next person on this list, number 7, Hakeem Jeffries? Hakeem Jeffries is the Democratic minority leader in the House of Representatives. But if polls are to be believed, there's a very, very good chance that by the end of 2026, he'll be mere days away from becoming Speaker of the House. So, therefore, a lot of things will be really interesting and important to watch regarding Jeffries. First, how does he define himself? So far, we know very little about him, weirdly enough. We know he's a moderate Democrat, we know he's a pretty good fundraiser, we know he's very careful, and we know he's a little bit bland. But what makes him tick? What guides his views, his politics? Who is he, and what will that mean? We need a narrative from which to understand what he'll do. Secondly, it's important to see how he takes on what will be his life's biggest task, managing the House Democratic Party going into next year's midterms. Because that same managerial style will be what he uses if and when he becomes Speaker of the House. Does he endorse in a large number of primaries, or does he take a slightly more hands-off approach? Does he campaign just for ideological allies, or also for progressives he may worry could become troublemakers? His failure to endorse Mamdani this year suggests a possible answer, but the test next year will be bigger and more thought out. Coming in at number 6, we've got Jeffries' main opponent, Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson is the current Republican Speaker of the House, making him both important from a process and policy perspective. The first thing that'll be interesting to watch regarding Johnson is whether he survives the first few months of the coming year. He has had a rough past couple of months, supercharged by the incredibly narrow majority he holds in the House. In the past few months, he's lost a couple of very big battles to the Democrats as well as a handful of Republican rebels in very high-profile discharge petitions. Most prominently the one on releasing the Epstein files, and now one on Obamacare subsidies that will come to a vote early next year. Just a couple days ago, he had to clarify that he is still in control, which means he isn't. So it'll be interesting to see if he regains some control over his caucus, or he ends up being toppled as Speaker of the House like Kevin McCarthy was before him. If he does regain some control, he will also be important to watch from an electoral point of view. How will he lead the House Republicans in the midterms next year? And how involved will he be with candidate selection? Will he endorse candidates during the primary, for example? Another interesting point to watch regarding Johnson is how much power he's willing to cede from the legislature to the executive. He already seems quite happy to cede quite a bit, but if the Trump administration takes the US into an armed conflict with Venezuela, does he step in and require a vote in Congress? That's the type of precedent-setting decision that will impact US government far into the future. Now, let's turn to number 5 with Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, is term limited and so isn't running in the gubernatorial race in his state this year. But he will stay on as governor of the state with the biggest economy for the whole of 2026, where he will own the retaliatory gerrymandering efforts that were passed in the Proposition 50 ballot earlier this year, and where he will likely continue picking fights with Trump over ICE raids. But of course, the real reason he's this high on the list is because he is effectively now the 2028 Democratic frontrunner for the presidential election. He isn't a sure thing by any means, but he does lead polls and will have an easy time fundraising. And the fact that he is the frontrunner also makes him a bit of a thought leader in the party. People will look to him for inspiration, for guidance, and for strategy in fighting Trump. So far, that strategy has been to fight fire with fire, playing hardball by taking the Trump administration to court and imitating Trump's rhetoric on social media. This has been incredibly successful. It is what has cemented Newsom as the favorite for 2028, and you best believe that other Democrats are looking at it and trying to replicate him. So in the midterms this year, it will be worth watching how much Newsom flexes his power position, how much he endorses and involves himself with the primaries, and how much and where he campaigns during the generals. Now, let's turn to number 4, Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth, Trump's Secretary of State for War, once Defense, has become one of the biggest profiles in the Trump cabinet for a combination of massive screw-ups and for just being really, really important. This coming year, it's important to watch Hegseth for one very simple reason: Venezuela. The Trump administration has been striking vessels they believe to be smuggling drugs from primarily Venezuela. The US has also moved troops, warships, and other military assets into the region, and the US is now blockading Venezuelan oil tankers. The administration is placing itself in a position where it's ready for an armed conflict with Venezuela, where it could topple Nicolas Maduro. But will this come to fruition? What will such a conflict look like? How will the lead-up be undertaken? And is there an exit ramp before escalation? These are all questions that we will likely get answers to in 2026, and the man at the center of everything will be Mr. Pete Hegseth. This all at the same time that Hegseth is also leading a bit of a culture shift at the now Department of War, focusing on physical fitness, culling any notions of DEI, and advocating for warrior mentality. And also happening at the same time as all of this is a bit of an ISIS resurgence in the Middle East, especially in Syria, which recently killed 2 US service members. How will the Department of War tackle this? Another Trump cabinet member worth watching and clocking in at number 3 is, of course, J.D. Vance. Trump's vice president, J.D. Vance, had a very eventful 2025. Expect his 2026 to be even more eventful. For starters, he is going to start laying some serious groundwork for his very, very likely presidential run in 2028. He will try to get a Trump endorsement for the race, which would in all likelihood clear the Republican primary field for him. And then he'll need to start really going after Democrat opponents. It'll be interesting to see how he tries to navigate this while staying wholly loyal to Trump as his vice president. And it'll be interesting to see how he plays the role of heir apparent during the 2026 midterms. Does he in any way try to distance himself from some of the more rowdy candidates? The other interesting thing to watch from Vance next year is his continued impact on MAGA ideology. Trump famously isn't always super ideologically coherent, but Vance is. And Vance has strong ideological views, especially when it comes to foreign policy and technology. On foreign policy, it is especially his view on Europe, frustration that America has played a key role in guaranteeing European security for decades at the expense of US taxpayers, that has big implications. 2026 will be another big year with debates around Ukraine especially, where the Trump administration is starting to be really ideologically directed by Vance. And with Vance likely running in 2028, he will fine-tune his arguments and take every opportunity he can to preach them. And this could have really tangible foreign policy implications. On technology, especially the tech giants and AI, Vance is also someone who recognizes and appreciates the power and potential effects that this could have. So it'll be really interesting to see these views develop and perhaps take more of a leading role in the administration next year as the AI boom continues to grow. It is now time for number 2. And believe it or not, it's the guy you probably thought was going to be number 1. It is, of course, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world. So, of course, everyone should be watching what he does in 2026. What does he do with regards to Venezuela? What about tariffs or cuts to the federal government? What about immigration? What about Ukraine and Gaza? These are just some of the threads from 2025 that'll carry into 2026. But the biggest things to watch out for are around the economy. One big element of that is the word affordability, which now seems to be on the lips of practically every US political commentator. Trump came into office promising to bring down prices, not how inflation works, by the way, and now people are starting to get really upset that prices are sticky, because that's how it works, but whatever. And inflation has now crawled up to 3%. Another big element is jobs. Job figures in the US economy have been very disappointing since around summertime, and despite replacing the labor statistics chief with a crony, the numbers haven't become any more positive for Trump. So how will he tackle this challenge? And a final economy-adjacent task he will face next year is replacing Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, whose term comes to an end in May 2026. Will Trump try to politicize the office? Will he be successful? Well, that's the type of decision that will set precedents for the distant future. Then, of course, there's the politics. How will Trump leave the Republicans going into the midterms? How involved will he be? How much will he endorse during primaries? And what will be the big political issues that he profiles his party on ahead of the election? And then as president, he can quickly set any new agenda whenever he wants. There will be important happenings next year dictated by Trump that we don't even have the imagination to ponder yet. So that's, of course, something to watch out for too. And with that, let's now turn to number 1 on this list. Perhaps a surprise and a bit of a weird choice, but I stand by it. It is Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff is formerly the US Special Envoy to the Middle East, but he is effectively also the US chief negotiator on the peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And that probably already sort of outlines 2 of the reasons why I've placed Witkoff all the way up at number 1, ahead of his own boss. He is effectively the shaker and mover on peace deals in the 2 conflicts probably most covered around the world. Let's start in the Middle East. Alongside Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and with backup from Marco Rubio, Witkoff successfully helped negotiate a 3-phase peace plan. The first phase, a hostage trade and a ceasefire, has been completed. Now phase 2, a demilitarization of Hamas, is due to take front stage next year. Witkoff will lead the talks from the US side, effectively the only side with genuine influence on Israeli decision-making, and he will therefore play a massive role in whether this demilitarization is peaceful or leads to more armed conflict. Of course, Israel and Hamas both play roles in it too, and Witkoff does serve at the behest of Trump, but he will be the man on the ground in most of the meetings, and that means a lot. And then there's Russia and Ukraine. Witkoff has spent the last month or so mostly focused on this conflict now, effectively engaging in shuttle diplomacy between the 2 countries, and this from a position where the US can put a lot of pressure on both sides, but especially Ukraine, to accept the type of peace that the US finds appropriate. In 2026, I think you can expect the US side of negotiations to decide on a proposed peace plan and to then do what they can to pressure Russia and Ukraine to accept. And Witkoff will be the political appointment with the most influence on the details of that plan. And that's why I put him at number 1. So now, let's hop over to the outro. That's that. The 12 US politicians I think are worth watching next year, plus a handful of honorable mentions who are probably also worth keeping an eye on. What do you think of the list? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are there any people that you think should have been included that weren't? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.